of measles cases nationwide this year has surpassed the total from 2025. That includes 3 new cases confirmed in Montgomery County near Houston.
And joining us now to talk about this and more, our med team doctor and infectious disease specialist, Dr. Ed Dominguez. Dr. Ed, first question here tonight. The U.S. now reports the most measles cases in any year since 1991. Where are all of these cases being reported for the most part, and what can we do to prevent the spread?
Well, Blake, for the most part, the cases are being reported, at least this year, in Virginia, Utah, and South Carolina. But there are other places that are popping up over the last few weeks, including Pennsylvania and, as you mentioned, in Texas now, with just a few cases. The major way to prevent spread is through either getting natural infection, which we're trying to prevent, or vaccination. But the problem is you have to have about 95% or more of the population immune in order to develop herd immunity. And in the places that are developing these outbreaks, we're nowhere near that level of protection.
And Dr. Ed, new recommendations are changing how doctors assess and manage cardiovascular risk. What are those new recommendations, and how will they impact the number of people on statins?
Yeah, these are big changes. They affect a lot of us, myself included. We're using new calculators called the Prevent Calculator to determine cardiovascular risk, Jennifer. And these calculators for people between the ages of 30 and 79 are gender specific, but they're race free, recognizing that race is not a biological factor. However, they now include a variety of other labs that we didn't include before. Things like urine measurements and certain blood sugar measurements. Also includes things like menopause and perimenopause. It's going to likely increase the number of people on statins because the LDL target, cholesterol targets, have also been adjusted. So we'll probably see more people on therapy.
All right, we'll have to follow along with that. Dr. Ed, a new vaccine for pancreatic cancer is offering some hope at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. How does this vaccine work, and how effective is it?
Yeah, this is potentially a major breakthrough, Blake. It's a vaccine called the mCRAS, K-R-A-S vaccine. It targets 6 different CRAS mutations that represent about 90% of the mutations causing pancreatic cancer. Now, they looked at this study. They did a study in 20 subjects. They gave them 4 shots of the vaccine over 13 weeks and followed them for up to a couple of years. 90% of them responded. Actually, none of them developed pancreatic cancer. It seems that the vaccine may last 2 years. We're not sure if you need more after that. We need larger and longer studies, but boy, this is a huge breakthrough.
All right, as always, Med Team Dr. Ed Dominguez, our thanks to you.